Hello again. Jake Maggard was settled here to talk about land change modeling and urbanization and recognizing stages of development. So you've just finished a lab where using a tool, you're able to apply some weightings to different facets of land change, do an analysis of land change, and even predict urbanization. So the last couple of videos, we went over our Gulf of Mexico data product, the settled GOM data product, talked about how it's a rigid data set, so you can run your operations off of it. It has exact answers for all the data types you need to run your oil and gas business. Last video, we also talked about EBIS, which is Settled's revolutionary representational data product designed to harness the power of paragraphical news, investor presentation bullet points, and get that stuff spatialized so that you can sort of relate it all objectively and get it back to the user. Now what I want to talk about is what I call a mashup. So we have another product here at Settled. We call it our Global Vessel Data product. This is a bit of a dashboard view of that product. What we have is our GOM data product inside of this operations dashboard template alongside another vendor's data, Marine Traffic's AIS vessel position data. So what I'm going to do is pick a vessel and just show you quickly some of the purpose of this particular dashboard. This dashboard is telling me, I looked for the Harvey Pioneer. It's telling me that it traversed the Gulf of Mexico along this track. I can see that the latest position through this marker in this red vessel, or this blue vessel actually, means that's its latest position as of the time of this data. So that particular vessel looks like it sat at the port for a while, crossed the Gulf of Mexico, crossing these folks' blocks, and ended up working for Shell for a better period of a day. This is 168 hourly positions, of which this boat pinged 80 times. So on average, this boat is pinging every 2 hours. Looks like it sat out at Shell for nearly a day out of the Perdido development. Part of the purpose of this is also to say, I'd rather just understand what's going on in this particular area. So we do understand what the Harvey Pioneer itself did. It worked for Shell. It drove out here and worked for Shell. Let's see what other vessels have been working in this area. So we see the Deepwater Pontus, the Harvey Discovery, the Q4000 rig, the Agnes Candy's tugboat, various other vessels working in this area in the last 7 days. Next up, we want to use the AIS historian to better understand urbanization time frame. What you see here is 3 million vessel positions over several months. We can use these AIS vessel locations to determine what stage of a development certain areas are in. Stage 1 is typically going to be seismic acquisition. Then we might move to site clearance, drilling, subsea engineering and pipe lay, and then first production. Turning on the taps, obviously, is the end result, paying back development costs and profiting. Let's start with seismic acquisition. Seismic acquisition is in the exploration phase, comes before or after leasing. There are speculative seismic surveys run by companies like CGG, PGS. There's non-spec surveys run by those companies on behalf of operators. Oftentimes this is confidential, kept in secret. These companies offer the raw data up to these operators so that they can use their internal geophysics and staff to process the subsurface the way they like, or they sometimes process the data for certain companies. Um, the use case is to evaluate subsurface characteristics and obviously to find hydrocarbon deposits. I've queried the vessel locations down to type name equals research survey vessel, and I see some apparent results here that this down here in Mexican waters looks definitely like it could be a seismic survey. I can do a little bit further investigation to check that out. Looking at boat names like Veritas Viking, GeoWave Voyager, those do seem like they're seismic survey vessels. Take a look at the Veritas Viking. Definitely a survey vessel, at least a survey support vessel. Take a look at the GeoWave Voyager. This is definitely a seismic survey vessel. So I think this is the main vessel, the other is a support vessel. Um, Regardless, it looks like they're running a seismic survey down here um, in the middle of the summer, this past summer. So I took a moment to open up EBIS and take a look in the area where we're looking at that potential seismic survey, and I see that it's an area that Mexico offered in lease sale 2.4. Back to the ArcMap project, the lease sale 2.4 just completed this past February with Shell and Chevron winning quite a number of blocks. You see that it was dominated by Shell. Let's take a look at some other result pictures. You see Chevron and Pemex already had those blocks, active blocks, CNOOC, the Chinese oil company, Total, Exxon, BHP. This shape here was won by Shell and Pemex during 2.4. These down here were Shell and Qatar Petroleum. These were Pemex. So taking a look, I identify some of the same shapes. This is Shell and Qatar down here. This is Shell here, Shell and Pemex. These are some of these existing blocks, Chevron, CNOOC, in this area. So I've added some more data, the Gulf of Mexico, just so you can see what a seismic survey, a 3D extent polygon typically looks like. This shape is not abnormal compared to these other shapes, 3D surveys that have been run in the past. So all in all, it looks like last summer, I've also highlighted Chevron and Shell blocks in the Gulf of Mexico in blue and red, respectively. All in all, it looks like last summer, Chevron, Shell, and some others had a seismic survey run down here. Perhaps CGG did it on its own with a speculative run and then sold that throughout the summer, end of summer, fall, so that these folks could process that data and decide on how they would bid in the February Mexico bid round 2.4. Once a company has seismic data, they've studied an area, they've narrowed down where they'd like to develop, they often have to move to site clearance stage. So stage number 2, early development. This is when the area is already leased, they're getting ready to drill, they collect bathymetry, side scan sonar, sub-bottom profiler. They use this data to evaluate seabed terrain, slope, chemosynthetic communities, any kind of plant life, hazards, gas vents, purpose is to get a drilling permit. So looking across at the queried vessel positions that we had over the summer, looks like Shell was doing something over here that to me looks like a seabed survey. Taking our AIS vessel positions into the GOM data product base map, I'm able to see that it does look like Shell was doing some survey work in between Mars and Ursa. I can take a look at these vessels, and I see that the Venture comes up quite a lot if I'm clicking through this. I can take a look at exactly what type of boat the Venture is. And we can't presuppose completely what this vessel is doing out there. I will say that the vessel does look like it could, in fact, carry an AUV, launch an AUV. We'd be looking for a crane apparatus in the back. I only have this one photo, so I can't quite see, but it's a good chance this is an AUV vessel. So the Venture spent quite a bit of time around here in the fall, end of November. You see it's working for Shell. I would say that this boat is generally probably an AUV mothership, an autonomous underwater vehicle with some planned operations, track lines running in this area. This boat is the mothership on the surface, the sea surface, communicating with the autonomous underwater vehicle. These spots are that boat. The track lines for the AUV would be more linear. Like I said, this is the second stage of offshore urbanization. Collected some seismic, decided where to leased, narrowed down where we'd like to drill, did some site clearance, trying to get that permit. The next step is drilling. Drilling's pretty straightforward. It's a development phase. Got to have it permitted first. Drill to the target, the hydrocarbons. Types of drilling: vertical, directional, horizontal. Drill down to the target, evaluate the potential, decide on a field development plan. Taking a look across this, I've changed my query for the vessels to drill ship, and I'm looking across this. Straight away it looks like someone has done a rig move. I see this line across here. I confirm that by saying, okay, Noble Bob Douglas, Noble Bob Douglas. So they don't drill like that. That's a movement. That's a rig move. So what I'm going to do is change my query real quick to just to look at that one rig, and I can get a sense for where that one rig has been now. Looks like it had a campaign around the Gulf of Mexico. So knowing where a rig has been, where it's going to go, forecasting it, we did some of that in the first video. As you can tell, AIS vessel position is super important. We could put a time slider on this and show you where it's been and where it's gone. But in the interest of time, let's move on to the next phase. Subsea engineering and pipe lay. Again, in the development phase, you've got a development plan in place. It's time to engineer the site. That can involve jumper metrology, measurement for prefabrication, ROV data, going down, checking out the site, different gas vents, things. A pipe lay vessel. This is building up the site for eventual production, so it's a plan for first production. So let's take a look at this area here, which is the Atlantis area, the BP area. going to identify a cluster of these vessel locations here. And I see I really get two vessels, the Seven Oceans and the Artemis Arctic. Take a look at the Seven Oceans. What is that? So it's a research survey vessel. Looks like a support vessel. Could do a little bit of crane work if necessary. Probably a support vessel for either an AUV or an ROV survey. The Artemis Arctic. Looks like an old stodgy survey vessel for sure. Could be running an AUV or an ROV. Typically, an AUV might have a flatter back deck or a means to drop it in the water a little differently than this. The cranes, maybe this is an ROV vessel. Typically, the way you'd handle this is you'd make a lookup table for the types of vessels out there, the owners, the names, and then you might specify what equipment is on those vessels, and that would help you with your analytics as you go forward. In this particular case, these blocks are not leased, which leads me to believe this could be pipeline inspection work, maybe using an ROV coming through this area. This is a BP leasehold here. So yeah, deducing those things, this could be pipeline inspection work. Then again, it could be an AUV survey. We're just kind of going through the motions here, looking at survey vessels. Like I said, a lookup table, a good lookup table would help us solve that problem. Next up, let's look at an actual pipe lay vessel. As one of the last phases to getting a site online, building a pipeline is a pretty important part of a development. This looks like it could possibly be a new pipeline, but it seems to be going in an area that I wouldn't expect. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, I wouldn't expect a pipeline to be going, way offshore, parallel to shore, very deep water. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I can see those are the 7 Seas. What I know about the 7 Seas is in the summer, the 7 Seas, it's a subsea 7 vessel, and it was laying some infill flow lines for Stampede. So it looks like that was just the subsea 7 Seas traversing the Gulf of Mexico to come over here to the Stampede prospect. This is a Hess operated prospect, and lay this infill flow line. So let's take a look at these locations here, these AIS positions, see who they are. As I thought, they're the 7 Seas vessel. It's a subsea 7 vessel. It was out there in the middle of July. And here's what it looks like. Pipelay vessels are quite interesting looking. They have a spool, a long stinger. You can picture the pipeline looping over this way and dropping off into the water thousands of feet deep. It almost looks like a spaghetti noodle. You wouldn't expect it to have so much flexibility, but yeah, they do. And for the final phase, we have first production. So turn on the taps. We've got some important data with flowback tests, IP rate. You can forecast the decline curve. The objective is to produce the well or the field and pay back the development costs and then ultimately profit. Here's our symbology for first production in the last 180 days. This particular first production is close to, it's in the Tornado Prospect, close to Helix. Again, this is one last stage in the development process. This production needs to be piped back to a processing facility, as we discussed in the first video, and sent to shore. In summary, we used rigid data, our GOM data product, and representational data, we used a little bit there, our settled EBIS, alongside marine traffic's AIS data set to create a valuable mashup that we call settled global vessel data product that can be used to recognize, better understand, and ultimately predict development stages and E&P urbanization. So just like last week, when we talked about the DJ Basin and the lack of gathering in these new Codell Niobrara areas, we've proven that using geospatial data and analytics can lead us to a greater understanding of our environment, our surroundings, business decisions, and can lead us to an objective, best fit decision for our operations.